Morning guys, so today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, and I'll give you a little bit of background first. So over the last several months, as well as doing all the sort of the health stuff on the veganism adventure that I've been on, I've also been doing a lot of research into the conditions that animals are kept in and the work that's being done to fight for better conditions and ultimately to end animal slaughter. And I've felt a growing feeling that I should be doing more for this movement. So today I'm going to be attending a march for the very first time. It's organised by a group called Direct Action Everywhere, and they're headquartered here in Berkeley, California, but they're a global organisation. So they're organising marches and lobbying and changes in the law for all sorts of things. And today's march is all about the right to know. I have read the draft legislation, and the idea is we want to be able to pass a law in the city of Berkeley to begin with that gives consumers the right to know where their food actually comes from and what processes it goes through in order to make it to their supermarket shelves. So ultimately, what we want is to have some signs out that show that encourage people to ask where their food comes from, and then on the actual packaging we're going to be asking for a list of any mutilations that the animals might have been through in order to get through to the supermarket shelf. And if you're not familiar with what I mean by mutilation, I'll give you a quick example. So a very common practice is for baby piglets to have their teeth ripped out, to have their genitals removed, and to have their tails clipped, all without anaesthetic, and then just get thrown back in the pen with the others. So we want to see that actually listed where the food is for sale, so people know exactly what process the animals have been through in order to get there. And the other thing that we're asking for is for the locations of these factory farms to be made available. So when you try to actually ask where does your food come from, and it has a nice little picture of, you know, little chickens running around in an open field, or, you know, cows grazing out on the grass, that's actually generally not true, not a true representation of how they're actually living. And if you try to ask about where the farms actually are so you can go see the conditions they're kept in, then nobody will tell you, and they're not really obliged to at the moment. So the other part of the law is to get people to be able to find out where these things are happening if they want to. So I don't really know exactly what to expect today. I did go on a rights march once when I was very young, when I was about 11 years old, but it was a very long time ago. So this will be my first one as an adult. So I'm going to bring you guys along, I'm going to document the experience for you, and maybe it'll give you a little bit of insight if this is something that you might want to do in the future. Alright guys, so I've ended up being real late to the party because I got into a car accident. Somebody actually just hit me from behind on the freeway. He indicated he would pull over. I followed him for 3 miles and then he drove off. So it just goes to show there are some wonderful people in the world, but I got the police report and now I'm moving on, and I just happened to have ended up parking up right where the protest is, so I'm going to go join those guys right now.
Don't buy the humane line!
Animals do not want to die!
Don't buy the humane line!
Animals do not want to die!
It's not!
When I caught up with the march, they'd actually marched from the park where we were supposed to be meeting, and they'd stopped outside a Whole Foods and were holding up these signs that say right to know, and everyone's holding the same signs. It's pretty well coordinated. And there's a girl with a megaphone who you can probably hear leading chants. So all these chants are published on Facebook in advance so that you can get used to what they are and know what the words are and all that kind of stuff. So it's very well organized and very well choreographed to give the effect that we want. And I guess the aim here is to cause a little bit of disruption to people who are going into Whole Foods and buying products that they believe are marked as humane that actually are not so.
It's violence! Killing! It's no violence! It's not food! It's violence! Animals feel pain!
So one cool thing that happened while we were standing here that unfortunately I did not catch on video, but a sign was unfurled from the roof of Whole Foods that said, "Show us the farms." And obviously nobody was willing to step up and take credit for that right there and then, but there was a big round of applause for whoever it was who managed to do it. and it was pretty interesting to see the manager of Whole Foods scrambling to figure out how to get this sign down from his roof. And you might ask, what good does that really do? But all these things serve to raise interest and get people to come up and ask questions. So members of the public are coming up and asking, what's this sign all about? What are you guys here for? And all that kind of thing. And then we can explain, the things that we're going after.
Just like us! Animals don't want to be killed! Just like us! It's not food! It's fun!
So after about 10 or 15 minutes outside Whole Foods, we continued the march and we went round the block back up towards the park where the march actually started, and continuing the drum beats and the chanting to try to capture as much attention as possible.
Animals do not want to die! It's not food! It's violence! It's not food! It's violence!
It's true. Online.
So I just met Chris here. Chris is the police liaison for this march. And so Chris, tell us a little bit about how you liaise with police and what you tell them and what you don't tell them.
Well, most things I don't tell them, and the only times I really tell them something is if I'm being detained, and then I'll tell them my name and my address. But otherwise, if we're about to leave, I'll say, oh, we're about to leave, because we're about to leave anyways. But otherwise, I'll only tell them something if they are going to help us do it. So in other words, if we're marching down the street and they're going to block the streets for us, then I'll tell them where we're going, and that way they'll block the streets for us.
You may have noticed the kids in the background screaming out that they love hamburgers and finding the whole thing very amusing to poke fun at the people who are out there trying to create some awareness for animal rights. And, I think this is pretty terrible behavior, and I think it's a real crying shame that kids have been brought up to think that this is funny. So if you have kids then and you choose to eat meat, then I really hope that you'll help them understand where meat comes from, where animal products come from, and that they'll be a little bit more gracious in the way that they treat the whole situation. So after the march was over, we all got together and did a quick review of the impact that we'd made, and we shared announcements of what was going to be going on with DXE over the next few weeks, things that people could come and attend. And I took the opportunity to grab a few people and just interview them real briefly about what their experiences were with activism, what made them get involved, what was their first experience like. So here's a couple of those interviews.
All right. Hey everyone, my name is Priya, and I was not always an activist, and I was always an animal lover, and the reality was that I just did not know what's going on in the animal rights movement, and I started talking to vegans and animal rights, and most importantly, I met a group of people that were so excited about doing activism and gave me a light, gave me hope, and gave me a path as an activist to get to the point where we don't have to see a world where animals are suffering. And so that's when I joined Direct Action Everywhere and started doing my first speak out, which is when you take a megaphone or don't take a megaphone and just start speaking up for animals. So for me, it was just meeting other people who felt the same about animals and who felt like they had to do something and were actually taking action.
So I became a vegan after seeing undercover investigation footage of what was really happening to animals and farms. And it just didn't feel like enough to be changing my diet. And I was volunteering at a farm sanctuary with a friend when he said, why don't you come to a meeting and become an activist? And I thought that sounded a little scary. So he said, just come to one protest. And so we went to a Chipotle and we spoke out about how what they were selling as shredded pork was really the chopped up body of a dead pig. And the manager came out and yelled at us and asked us to leave, and I got scared and left. But then I kept coming back because it was important to tell the animal story. And just last week, they had to drag me out of a slaughterhouse and cut me out of chains because I was that committed to telling the world that what is happening to animals needs to change. It's not enough for just me to change my behavior. We need to speak out for them because they are victims that don't have a voice without us.
Julianne was probably one of the most extreme activists who was willing to really put her own well-being on the line in order to tell the animal's story. So if you're watching this and that the thought of taking that kind of action and putting yourself at risk in that way, then don't worry, you don't necessarily have to get that involved. There are lots of ways that you can contribute without having to do that kind of thing.
Saw a police car and several other vehicles coming, so we knew we had to move fast. We had originally thought we were going to wait for the cow to be in the slaughterhouse area to jump in, but we knew that they were going to arrest us, so we just jumped over and we chained ourselves to the chute where they were going to bring the cow in, so that they couldn't even bring the cow into the slaughterhouse, and they drove off with her because they didn't want to confront us. They didn't want to have to say what was happening. And we stood there for hours until they called 3 police vehicles, a fire engine, and campus police, and had to cut us out of chains and drag us away as we were screaming, "Where is the cow?" We named her Justice. We said, "Cow Polly, where is Justice?" And they literally grabbed us. I have a bruise from where the police grabbed us and drug us away, if you can see, without telling us where they were, and they threw me in a jail cell and didn't tell us where the cow was, and they still refused to tell us.
And there was an event that got cancelled as a direct result of your action, right?
That's right. Because they couldn't get the cow into the slaughterhouse because we were chained there, they canceled the slaughter class.
What's your name?
Matt Johnson.
Okay, Matt. So what was it that compelled you to get involved in activism?
So actually I would say it started when I was 4 years old, and I had a reaction that I think a lot of kids actually have, where I looked down at what was on my plate in front of me for the first time in my life, and I realized that this wasn't just some harmless piece of food, but I realized that this was the body of an animal who's an individual who wanted to live. And at that time I immediately went to my parents, and I had never heard the word vegetarian or vegan. I didn't tell them I don't want to eat meat. I didn't tell them I don't want to eat venison. I went and told my mom I don't want to eat animals. And I think that's just so simple and so powerful, and you see all these videos on all over Facebook and YouTube, all these kids that have very similar reactions. And so it's should be encouraging to us as animal rights activists that we can see that this is a common value. People don't want to hurt animals, and it's only because we live in a society that normalizes it to such an extent that it is allowed to persist. So what we really need to do is to try to connect people to the values they already hold. We don't need to try to convince them of new values, but just connect the dots, so to speak.
Well, I became a vegan when I suddenly realized, after seeing a lot of chickens in person in Hawaii, that they were sentient beings. And I, in fact, always have worried about animals, and it kept me up at night. And I just think it's horrible what happens to animals for people's pleasure, for people's food. So I noticed not on Facebook, but next door, somebody was being treated very badly. They were being beat up on because they had said something about how what happens to animals is a Holocaust. And so they were putting her down and being really angry, saying, you know, because they're Jewish, they take offense at that. Well, I'm Jewish, so I came to her defense and I said it is a Holocaust. In fact, Singer, who's a Holocaust survivor and a great American writer, he said that. I think it was his phrase. Every day is a Holocaust for animals. And so she and I became friends because I was defending her. And then I found out she was a member of Direct Action Everywhere, DXE. And she brought me to a few events, and I realized that DXE is a great way for me to become an activist. And it was the first time, after I became an activist, it was the first time in my life that I could actually sleep through the night without having anxiety about what happens to animals.
After the march, a lot of people went back to the Berkeley Animal Rights Center, where they were doing a little bit of art and craft, preparing for a march that's going to be happening in a few weeks' time. And what they're doing here is they're creating lots of animal masks that are going to be worn on the march. So that was my first experience, and I guess my conclusions that I drew from it were that, you know, there's definitely some really brave people who are putting their own well-being on the line here to try to change things, and I've got much respect for them. I think there's certainly a place for this kind of activism, for marches, for more extreme measures, and also for the, I guess, the attractivism that I've been involved in so far, educating people on how they can eat healthier and live a better life and make better choices for themselves. So I, on the whole, had a really positive experience. I met some really great people through this event, and I'm definitely going to try to attend more in the future and try to contribute more. So if this has inspired you to want to get involved, then I'm going to leave you with a short clip talking about an upcoming animal liberation conference which is being held here in Berkeley that you can go to, and that will be teaching you how to be an activist. And Julianne had a little bit more information that she's going to share with you and I'll leave you with that. So thanks very much for watching. Remember to subscribe to my channel for more videos in the future, and I will see you next time.
All right, the Animal Liberation Conference, which is an incredible chance for people to come learn how to be an activist, is coming up. It'll be over the Memorial Day weekend for 1 week. We're going to be doing protests, trainings, vigils. Glenn Greenwald, the award-winning journalist, is going to be there. Katie Tang, the Board of Supervisors person who introduced the San Francisco Fur Ban, is going to be there. And the very last day, on Tuesday after Memorial Day, we are going to be doing something historic that has never happened in the animal rights movement before. So go online, Google Animal Liberation Conference and register, and come be with 1,000 activists to change the world for animals.
That's right. I don't think I have anything else to put in there besides this is the place you want to be if you want to be a part of a growing movement that is making animal liberation happening in front of your eyes. We just passed the San Francisco Fur Ban and we are just starting. So today we're marching with 70 people at the Animal Liberation Conference. We have a march and we're expecting 1,000 people to be there, if not more. So we'll see you there, alconference.io/register.